Greetings, Earthlings! I'm Malakai. Welcome to the Genesis Key. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the authenticity of the New Testament. In recent times, I've heard a lot concerning the authenticity of the Bible. Not too long ago, I was at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Halifax. In their service, one of the missionaries declared that the Bible has been mistranslated due to thousands of years of translating and retranslating. On the surface, this argument sounds reasonable. However, the scriptures themselves declare many times that God will preserve his words, that they will never pass away, and that the gates of hell would not overcome his church. My argument, however, is not going to come from the scripture. As it happens, God made good on his promise to preserve his words. The question as to the authenticity of the New Testament is one that can be answered by pure scholarship. The main problem with the argument itself is that it is based on two demonstrably false premises. The first premise is that the New Testament transmission was linear, and that one person tells the other, who passed it on again, and they passed it on, and so on and so forth. The second is that the transmission was oral. Neither of these premises are true. The transmission of the Bible was geometric. The original copy was copied several times, quite extensively, and then more copies were made from those copies. These were written copies, not oral traditions, so we can test them in ways that we never could test oral traditions. We're now going to make an analogy of how scholars confidently reconstruct what the original copies said. We're going to imagine that I am the best chef this planet has ever seen. What are you laughing at? I said imagine. Anyway, as the best chef that this planet has ever seen, oi, I saw you snickering. As the best chef this planet has ever seen, I've just come up with the best recipe for cookies ever. So I write down the recipe, then write several copies of the recipe and give it to my friends, who love the cookies so much that they share the recipe as well. None of us have photocopiers because they were stolen by aliens. It's an analogy, come on, it doesn't have to be serious. Then, in an unfortunate twist, the aliens find out that they quite like my cookies too, because I'm the best chef ever. So once again, they invade, this time stealing as many copies of my recipe as they can. They leave. Again, doesn't have to be serious. All that matters is that many of the handwritten copies no longer exist. So anyway, I don't have the recipe anymore, but I really want it back. Those cookies were nice, man. So I asked my friends to gather the remaining copies. Eventually, I round up about 28 copies in total. Of the 28, 25 of them are exactly the same word for word. The remaining 3 show only slight variants. There is a spelling error on one, and another has inverted phrases. The third has an added extra ingredient so that no one else has on theirs. So, with the small amount of copies I now have, could I reasonably reconstruct the original recipe? Of course I could. Being a grammar Nazi, I could easily spot the misspelling, and it still means the same thing anyway. The inverted phrase stands out like a sore thumb. As for the extra ingredient, well, I think it's more likely that Bill added the ingredient than the other 27 people forgot to add it in. Plus, for some reason, the added ingredient is arsenic. Bill, don't eat any of those. This is a simplified form of what scholars do to criticize texts. This method is used on all works of antiquity, not just the Bible. Success of textual criticism depends on two factors. How many manuscripts are there, and how old are they? If there aren't very many, the age difference between the original oldest and the oldest copy is too large, the original text is harder to reconstruct. If the opposite is true, and many copies exist and they are reasonably close to the date the original was written, we can have great confidence in our ability to reconstruct the original. As it happens, this is true of the New Testament. In fact, we have more copies of the New Testament than we have of any work of antiquity. While the most well-preserved secular work of antiquity, Homer's Iliad, has only 647 copies left, the New Testament has 5,366. That's over 8 times the amount of the next well-preserved work of antiquity. The copies of the New Testament are represented by early fragments, uncial-codes and minuscules. Among nearly 3,000 minuscule fragments are 34 complete New Testaments dating from the 9th to the 15th century. Uncial manuscripts provide virtually complete New Testaments. Providing virtually complete New Testaments date back to the 4th century and earlier. The Chester Beatty Papyri contains most of the New Testament and is dated to the mid-3rd century. The Bodmer Papyri second collection includes the first 14 chapters of the Gospel of John, and much of the last 7 chapters. This dates from around 200 AD, or possibly even earlier. But the piece that fascinates me the most is the John Rylands Papyri. Barely 3 inches square, the John Rylands Papyri is a small portion of John 18:31-33 that was discovered in Egypt. It is dated to around 117 to 138 AD, though it may be even older, which shows that John's Gospel was circulating in Egypt less than 40 years after it was written. While it should be noted that only around 50 manuscripts contain the whole New Testament, the manuscript evidence for the authenticity of the New Testament is richer than Mr. Burns on payday, especially when you compare it to other works of antiquity. But still I'm not done. There are at least 2 more ways to verify the authenticity of the New Testament. The first is ancient Bible versions. Early in church history, the Bible was translated into Latin. Not long after, in order to help missionaries bring the Bible to others, it was translated into several other languages, such as Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, and Georgian. These translations make scholars even more confident in reconstructing the original. Finally, we have what is known as patristic quotations. Patristic quotations are quotes from the early church fathers that cite the scriptures at length. Bible scholar Bruce Metzger believed, quote, "If all other sources for knowledge of the text of the New Testament were destroyed, the patristic quotations would be sufficient alone for the reconstruction of practically the entire New Testament." Unquote. From this evidence, I think it is reasonable to conclude that the New Testament is very reliable. While there are over 300,000 variations of the New Testament, these differences are mainly spelling errors, inverted phrases, or slight additions and subtractions from the odd manuscripts test behave. When the 2 main text families are compared, they agree with each other 98% of the time. Virtually all remaining differences yield to textual criticism, making the New Testament at 99.5% textually pure. If anyone would like to disagree, they would also need to throw away every piece of historical information prior to the 2nd century on exactly the same grounds. The evidence suggests that the New Testament is the most textually pure work of antiquity this planet has ever had the pleasure to read. Thank you for watching. God bless.